All right. Good morning. Okay, so I'm going to do things a little bit differently than I normally do. Normally, when I'll start with the Parsha, if you will, and then go from the Parsha to the halachic topic. I'm going to go in the opposite direction. In other words, the discussion of the Parsha beyond the obvious, namely that. Because this is one of the most mysterious parshiot, perhaps, certainly in the story of Yetziat Mitzrayim. The whole question of what happened in the Malon, what happened in that hotel, the Moshe's version of the Hotel California. What happens there? Right, that doesn't let Moshe check out, as it were. But it's totally not clear. In other words, which of the children is the child without the Brit Milah? What exactly is the Moshe's sin? Why is God upset with him? How is it rectified through the Milah? How does it connect with the larger story? Because there's no overt discussion afterwards. In other words, we don't hear about Tzipora and the boys again until Parshat Yitro. It's clear they've gone back to Midian because Yitro brings her back. But exactly what happened? Did they go with Moshe to Mitzrayim? Did they not go with Moshe to Mitzrayim? Because all of these things are totally, left. We are left in the dark with regard to them. Well, that's a medrash. In other words, this is a type. There's those who want to claim that the reason why Moshe took her in the first place was, as a sign of, as a morale booster for Am Yisrael. He's not just coming on his own; he's bringing his family into it. So it has to be examined a little more fully. Hopefully, we'll have time to come back to that. But what's clear is that, or seems to be clear until we take a look at the Gemara, that there is a Brit Milah that takes place here, right? And that Tzipora is the Mohelet. And that seems to make a difference in terms of whether it's Moshe or Tzipora or the baby who is in danger is also not totally clear. But by Tzipora's action, that is what, if you will, saves the day. Well, I'm sorry?
No, I'm sorry. It sounds like a ridiculous question, but could a lady be a mohel according to halacha?
Oh, that's exactly what we're talking about. Right. That's exactly the issue, right? That's what. So I want to go beyond just that question. I'm going to come to that question, but I really want to look at 4 different or 3.5 different aspects halachically. One is not necessarily in this order. One can, as you said, can a lady be a mohelet halachically? Is that something which is all right? Number 2, which we'll deal with first, is what is if there is a chiyuv, an obligation on the part of the mother, as opposed to women in general? Is there some special connection that a mother has to the Brit Milah of her son, along the lines, perhaps, roughly parallel to what the father has? And also, we have to ask, what is the responsibility of the father? Exactly, what is his mitzvah to when it comes to Brit Milah? And the third, or really third, breaking down into 2, as we'll see, is we'll talk about more minhagim of the Milah. What about a woman being the sandakit? Right? In other words, a woman being, not the the godfather, but the god, but not the fairy godmother, but the godmother, right? Is that okay? In other words, is that can you have is it, it's not going to be presumably ma'akev if the woman does it, but is that something which is acceptable or something that which would raise an eyebrow? And then connected to that, which you probably wouldn't even think about, right, is but seems to be, at least, if you will, I'll just throw it out there as just to show you that it seems to have been the most early grounded minhag, though it's totally fallen on the wayside, and we'll come back to that. If you take a look at source number 20, towards the end of the shir here, in terms of the Makorot. Alright, so this is the Sidur of Rav Amram Gaon. And so we're talking about the 9th century, and it's a very important Sidur. There are halachot that are, it's not just a Sidur, it's also halachot that are mentioned, etc. And most of our Sidurim are based on the Sidur of Rav Amram Gaon, in terms of the text, etc. I mean, obviously, not getting now into the question now of the development of the Sidur, which is not a shiur, it's a semester course, at least. But okay, let's take a look what he writes with regard to Brit Milah. So he says, Mishagrin et hakos li'imo shel tinok. In other words, once you say there's no mention of the bracha of that we have of and the naming of the baby, we have the bracha of the milah in the Gemara, but the kashem shenichnas lebrit, that is mentioned in the Gemara, but asher kidesh you did be betan, that bracha and the naming isn't mentioned. That comes up at the time of the Gaonim, and as well as the kos shel bracha, the wine that is, that we have there. And so you have a problem. Who should drink the cup? That's not a big problem, but it's like now you made the bracha. Who should drink the cup? So the Rav Amram Gaon says, without hesitation, this is clearly the minhag. Mishagrin et hakos li'imo shel tinok. You send the cup of the wine to the mother of the baby. V'lama li'imo shel tinok. Why? Shene'emar alav shira. Because we just said a bracha of praise on this particular kos shel bracha. Uvikshura tzibur rachamim al tinok va'al imo. And the tzibur has in mind the health of the mother as well as the health of the baby. K'moshe regilin lamar k'shem shachnasat telebris kach nitach nisei l'torah l'chupa v'tishtalech asuta. And a refuah, asuta is a refuah, a recuperation should be sent to the people who are at the moment who are ill. Who are they? Imo cholahi v'tzricha l'rachamin u'refuah. So the baby needs to be recuperate from the brit milah, and the mother needs to recuperate from the birth. B'lachach shota ota imo shel tinok, and that's why the mother drinks this cup of wine. Right? I've been to a lot of britot. I've never seen the mother drink from the cup of the wine. Right?
Wouldn't there be an issue of nida in the mother of the coast?
Okay, so exactly who? So the father doesn't hand the bracha, doesn't hand the kos to her. So you put it down and she picks it up. We hand it to another woman and she hands it over. But there are.
Doesn't anyone who touches the coast have a problem now?
Why?
Because she's touched it.
No, we don't. I mean that once the whole notion of the tuma and tahara of a woman a postpartum. So any issue of tuma v'tahara, right, is something which is no longer applicable in the time of the Gaonim. Right? The only issue here with regard to passing things directly or between husband and wife and no one else. There's no other. Okay. So the question is, where did that minhag go to?
What happens if you give birth to a girl?
So we don't have a bracha? In other words, there was no kos. There isn't a public ceremony. You can ask a question. In other words, it's clear, that in all of this, the mother and the father, for that matter, are the supporting actors, right? They're not the star of the show is the Rachanimol, right? So you have the Brit, and there is traditionally no ceremony parallel ceremony for the birth of a girl. Right? We have the Brit Milah and the bracha and the kos and all of that is generated because we have the Brit Milah, not the other way around. So had there been no Brit Milah, we probably wouldn't have a kos shel bracha with regard to the birth of a boy either. And that's what's going on here. Okay, so those, if you will, are the four issues that I want to be focusing again. Is there a special, and now we'll do the question in the order that I'll do it in. Is there some kind of special responsibility on the part of the mother to make sure that her son has a Brit Milah? Number two, can women in general have an active role and be the mohalot? And number three is the role of the ancillary role of sandak, drinking the cup, etc. Is there a place for women in those areas? Okay, so those are the different areas. And if we have time, right, it's a pretty big if, then we'll try to come back and we'll talk about maybe a little bit about the Parsha in terms of trying to understand different approaches to understanding what's happening with the Parsha itself. So let's take a look here at page number 2, the flip side, section Bet, the Chiyuv Isha Lamul et Bina, right? The responsibility, the obligation of a woman to give a Brit Milah to her own son. So the Gemara in Kiddushin says the following. This is source number 6. Lamulo. The Mishnah had said that a father has a responsibility to that there are certain mitzvot that are applicable to the father, not to the mother, and one of the mitzvot which is applicable to the father is the mitzvah to give a Brit Milah to his son. So Minavan, where is this? The Mishnah, the Gemara asks, where do we learn this mitzvah for a father to make sure that his son has a Brit Milah? Dichtiv vayamol Avraham et Yitzchak beno. Okay, pretty straightforward. Avraham does the Brit Milah for Yitzchak. Vehecha, the Gemara says now, when delo mahale avua, when the father did not circumcise his son, michayvei beidina limimhale. So then it becomes a responsibility of the Beit Din to give a Brit Milah to this baby. It could happen under many different circumstances. It could be that God forbid, that the child is an orphan, that the father has passed away. It could be a situation where the father, for whatever the reason, is not present at the moment, and the child needs a Brit Milah. Right? Excuse me? Right? It could be. Right? Dichtiv. Right? So where does that come from? Himol lachem kol zachar. Okay? So in other words, there's this chiyuv which is for the community as a whole, and Beit Din represents the community, and so therefore Beit Din has to make sure that that every boy in the community has a Brit Milah. Vehecha delo mahale Beit Dina. And if, for whatever the reason, the Beit Din did not ensure that the child had a Brit Milah, michayev iu libim al nafshe. So then, the ultimate responsibility falls upon the person himself. Dichtiv ve'arel zachar asher lo yimolet b'sar olato v'nichrita. It was a person who is uncircumcised. So this is before there is an Am Yisrael. The Torah says v'nichrita, that person will be cut off from his people. Right. So and I'll just throw out another little nugget. Right. The idea that there are two mitzvot aseh, only two mitzvot aseh, in which the penalty for the lack of fulfillment of those mitzvot is karet. And they are Brit Milah and Korban Pesach. Right? And they are both mitzvot which strike to the identity of the individual. In other words, a person who doesn't have a Brit Milah on an individual level, so there's something lacking within his first Brit, as it were, actual covenant, with regard to as a member of Am Yisrael. And a person who doesn't bring a Korban Pesach, if you think about what the Korban Pesach represents, the first Korban Pesach, so a person who doesn't bring a Korban Pesach, so is basically staying in Egypt, not taking that next step to leave Egypt and to put his destiny or her destiny, in the case of Korban Pesach, with the rest of Am Yisrael. And the two are also connected in the sense, and perhaps this is part of our connection in our parsha as well. In other words, as Moshe is going to now initiate the Yetziat Mitzrayim, so it's incumbent that his child has a Brit Milah, that he has a Brit Milah, where there's going to be the need for Brit Milah before Am Yisrael brings the Korban Pesach. Right? That's one of the mitzvot that Am Yisrael is going to have to do as part of it. That's the pasuk in Yechezkel, va'omer lach b'damai chayi, va'omer lach b'damai chayi. So there are two different bloods. It's the blood of the Korban Pesach, but it's also the blood of the Brit Milah, and we can understand how they are interwoven together. Right? So this is the ultimate, getting back to the Gemara for a moment, that is the ultimate responsibility, is the person himself to have the Brit Milah. So if comes the age of 13 and he doesn't have his Brit Milah, so he has to make sure that he gets a Brit Milah. And the karet, by the way, it's important to stress this as well. I'll take the question just 1 second. The karet, that penalty is the penalty of the person himself. In other words, a father, let's say the father is negligent in making sure, ensures that he doesn't believe in Brit Milah, so he doesn't circumcise his son, and he refuses to have his son circumcised. So the penalty for that is not karet. In other words, the father had a mitzvat aseh to himolachem kol basar or vayamol Abraham, whatever it might be, but the karet, the penalty, is for the person who is supposed to have the Brit Milah, when he obviously not going to have that chiyuv when he's still a minor, but only it's only when he's going to have the chiyuv of mitzvot in general. But at that point, from the moment he turns bar mitzvah, so he has that chiyuv to make sure that he has a Brit Milah for himself. Yes.
Interestingly enough, those are the two mitzvot where Eliyahu Hanavi's presence is there.
Okay, that connects it also, and then you have the eschatological vision of Hinei Anochi Sholeach Lachem et Eliyahu Hanavi Lifnei Bo Hashem, and you have all of these things connected, and so that is also a good point. But now the Gemara asks, the last line in number 6 now, Ihi minalan de lo mechayva. What about the mother? How do I know that she doesn't have a chiyuv? Dichtiv ka'asher tziva oto Elokim oto velo ota. Right? That Avraham, vayamol Avraham et Yitzhak beno ka'asher shmonat yamim ka'asher tziva oto Elokim, as God had commanded him. Oto commanded him, and there's the drasha velo ota, not Sarah. There wasn't a chiyuv. Okay.
But every mitzvah that was given before Matan Torah had to be reinforced after Matan Torah.
Right.
We have in Parshas Tozriah.
Correct.
But VaEra doesn't necessarily only talk about the man.
But okay, so here this is a much longer question, which I don't want to get into right now. But most of the halachot of Brit Milah, most of the depth of Brit Milah is learned from what happens with Abraham. Right? And we talk about Lachniso Bevrito Shel Avraham Avinu. Right? Even though you say, well, what's a Brit of Avraham Avinu once you have Brit Sinai? Right? That's sort of that's pre-Torah. That's not once I have the Torah. But the Torah, by introducing and telling us about Brit Milah through Avraham, is saying that is not just the model or the rationale for the reason, but rather that is that's the blueprint, right? And so now, when the Torah reinforces it later, so then we do a cut and paste and say, okay, what is the Torah telling us? Right? Because it's also pretty cryptic in Parshat Tazria. It just says, and then the 8th day, you do Brit Milah, right? So look back and look at all the 13 times it references the word Brit in the Parsha with Avraham and all of these different things. So
it doesn't necessarily mean male or female could do it.
Correct, but we have the drasha. Okay, fine. In other words, is this a drasha which is the source of the din, or is this the drasha which is we have the misorah that mothers don't have the chiyuv, and now the Gemara is looking for some kind of drasha in the text to which we can pin it, but the misorah was already there. That's also possible. Now the Rishonim ask the following question on this particular issue. So we'll take a look at the Ritva number 7. Ritva says, V'chitema. So if you're going to ask the following question, a very simple question, Lama likra? Why do I need a special pasuk to remove the saras of the world from the chiyuv? Because typically, the mitzvat aseh shazman gramahi. Brit Milah is a mitzvat aseh shazman grama. Right? You could have said, and I don't want to get into why isn't this the question, the way he phrases it, that you can only do it after day 8. Okay? But that in itself probably doesn't make it a mitzvah aseh shazman grama, because that's just the starting point. Okay? But the point which is clear is the milah biyom v'lo b'layla. Right? You're not allowed to do a Brit Milah at night. Brit Milah is only during the day. And so that should be considered like a mitzvah aseh v'nashim p'turot. And women are p'turot from all mitzvot aseh shazman grama. So you don't even need the whole discussion in the Gemara. It's superfluous. Ikalamema. So the Ritva says the following. Dahatam hu b'mitzvah dinafsha. What do I say a woman is p'turah from mitzvot aseh shazman grama? We say that when it comes to mitzvot that are incumbent upon her. But this is aval hacha b'mitzvah dibina. This is not her mitzvah. This is the baby's mitzvah. And so that have amina de mechayva. So I would have said that the mother is chayavet. De lo garami beitin de mechayva lemimhale. She shouldn't be any worse than the beitin who has a chiyuv. In other words, what is the chiyuv of the beitin? Right, we said first the father. We'll get to the question in a moment of what's the chiyuv of the father. But what's the chiyuv of the beitin? Right, you have the chiyuv of the father. Okay, no father. for whatever the reason. He's out of the picture. So now we say it falls on the Beit Din. What is that chiyuv? So the chiyuv isn't to do the Brit Milah, but rather to make sure that baby boys of the community have a Brit Milah. That's the chiyuv. So it could be the Gemara is moving. So now the woman doesn't have a chiyuv to do the Brit Milah because it's a mitzvah l'aseh shazman grama. Okay, if it were, but she should have a chiyuv, or perhaps can have a chiyuv to make sure that the Brit Milah is done. As it's sort of like the first line of defense. Before we bring it into the Beit Din even, well, let the mother take care of it. That's what's going to happen in actuality, right? In 99% of the cases, perhaps more than 99% of the cases, if for whatever the reason the father is not involved, and even when the father is involved, by the way, right? So who makes sure that the Brit Milah happens, right? So the mother makes sure that Brit Milah happens. Right, so she'll pick up the phone and call the moel, right, and arrange for it, and etc., and call the caterer or whatever needs to be done, right? So that, right, I'd say before the Beit Din has to get involved, so the mother has that, perhaps has the chiyuv, and then we're saying no, the mother is no different, if according to the way the Ritva would say, what the pasuk is saying is that the mother is no different than any other member of the tzibur. She doesn't have a special chiyuv to make sure that her son has a brit milah. Let's say I would just to throw it out, make it the rid. I could make a subtle distinction between what the Ritva says and its contemporary. It's an Italian Baal Tosfot of the Rishaya Detrani. That's the rid. But he says it even more explicitly, because what he says is the following. There might be a slight nuanced distinction, but we'll leave it aside for the moment. He asked the same question as the Ritva. So, but then he gives a similar answer. Mitzvah de lo talya begufa, just in the bold print, number 8. Kigon lamulat bena afal gav de milata ben yesh lazman. Nihi de kavua azman leben hanimo. The time constraint is for the baby, but aval ha'av. So as he now goes to the father, okay, let's compare the mother to the father. What is the chiyuv of the father? So is the chiyuv of the father to actually do the Brit Milah, and then we get into all sorts of questions which are not the issue of my shir right now, of shlichut. In other words, does the father have to appoint a mohel? Should the father ideally do it himself, etc.? Who makes brachot? All of these questions that come up, leave them aside for the moment. The Rid says, and perhaps the Ritva agrees with him, is that basically what is the father's mitzvah? So he says the father's mitzvah isn't to do the Brit Milah. The father's mitzvah is shetzivawa borei lehit'asek b'milat bino. The mitzvah is to be involved with the child's brit. In other words, to make sure it happens. Ha'esek hahu ein lo zman sheben b'yom uvein b'layla yitrach v'yachin tzarchei milat bino. Right, for that week beforehand, when it's basically a father picking up the phone and calling a mohel. Right, the baby's born, and the father, the mother is taken to the recovery with the baby, etc. And the father walks out of the room for a moment and calls the mohel, right, and says, Mazel Tov, right, Bezrat Hashem, a week from now we're going to have a Brit Milah. Are you available? That's a kiyum of the mitzvah. The Rid is saying it's not preparation for the mitzvah. That is his mitzvah. The mitzvah is to make sure that the child has the brit. So the moment that the father is involved in that, he's being mekayim the mitzvah, and that has no time constraint. In other words, that is until the baby has the brit milah. That's the mitzvah. So that theoretically could be incumbent upon the mother as well. And so the answer is that no. The hilkach ilavo to have mechavinan gama isha ve'en zman hakavua l'kein potra. That's why the Torah has to come up, or the drasha has to come up with a specific tour. Dehave amina dehiti tasek ben biyom ben balayla shitimolet bina bizmano. I would have thought that she has that responsibility. She doesn't have that responsibility. What is her responsibility then? So presumably it's no different than any other member of the tzibur. Let's say I live in a community without a beit din. Right, a small Jewish community in Yenemsveld, and there's a baby that's born in the community, and for whatever the reason, the father is not involved, and is not going to make sure that the child has a brit. So I become the beit din. In other words, the beit din is just a representative of the community, and let's say there are no men in that community. Right? The only other person in the community, or the only other families, are women in the community. Right? So they're the community. And if there are men in the community, women are still part of the community. So it's just, they would have that chiyuv. What this Gemara is saying isn't that a woman doesn't have a chiyuv in terms of the milat haben. It's that that we don't assume, for whatever the reason, that the mother has more of a chiyuv than anyone else in the community. The father has more of a chiyuv than everyone else in the community. First line of defense here is the father. But the second line of defense is the community. And then the question is, who's the community? Who's going to represent the community? And usually it's going to be the kehila, the beit din, etc. But if it's not, so then it's all members of the community. And of course the mother is a member of the community as well. So that is that's what I take a look at the Gemara in Kedushin. Yeah.
Thinking about two things. One, what if the father is not Jewish?
Okay.
And the other thing is the phrase Torat Imecha keeps running through my mind as if to say that they're Torah's the mother's also.
Right. So you're right. First of all, if the father is not Jewish, so then that's that's what this comes down to. And also, by the way, without getting into the details now, the same type of question comes up with regard to Pidyon HaBen. As if let's say the father's not Jewish, but the mother is still, it's her first child. So would there's a need for a Pidyon, and who has to make sure that happens? Right, for another discussion. But here we're not saying that it's a legitimate question as well. What is the mitzvat chinuch that a mother has for her children? And how does that work? Again, beyond the scope of this particular shir. But here we're talking specifically with regard to the Brit Milah. So with regard to the Brit Milah, there isn't a chiyuv incumbent upon the mother. Okay, for that.
But is that because it's incumbent upon the person themselves? Meaning
not clear. In other words, it's the generally speaking, presumably we don't for obvious reasons beyond, and I say reasons, but it's not ideal for a boy to wait till he's 13 to have to take care of a Brit Milah, right? So that it's not only the technical side of that. In other words, that how difficult it would be for 13-year-olds to worry about Brit Milah, but it's also because that as part of the kahal from the very beginning, so all of the males of whatever age need to have the Brit Milah. So we want to make sure that happens. Okay, so now we come to question number 2. And question number 2 is the question of, what about can a woman be a mohelet at all? Right? Until now, we haven't been asking that question. Right? We've been talking about especially the way that it's being framed by the Ritva, by the Rid. So then it's a question of making sure that the Brit Milah is done. But what about a woman actually acting as a mohelet? Is that okay? So here the Gemara in Avodah Zarah asks the question. Itmar, Number 9. Minayin lemila ba'oved kochavim. It starts with that. Shehi psula. That's why it's Gemara in Avodah Zarah. It's talking about the relations with the non-Jews. So, can a non-Jew, you have a non-Jewish surgeon, can he do the Brit Milah? Daru bar papa mishmei derav amar va'ata et briti tishmor. V'Rabbi Yochanan himol yimol. So both Rav, this Daru bar papa quoting Rav, so we'll just say Rav, and Rabbi Yochanan agree that a non-Jew cannot act as the mohel, but they bring two different psukim. One is Ata et briti tishmor. So one is that you have to keep the brit, right? So it means someone who is involved in the brit already, who is a member of the tribe, member of the covenant. That, and as opposed to the non-Jew. And Rabbi Yochanan says himol yimol. This is a different pasuk. In other words, the pasuk of that there's that superfluity in the pasuk that you should surely shall thou make the Brit Milah. But the double himol yimol, meaning only someone who has the Brit Milah is going to be able to do the Brit Milah. Then the Gemara says, okay, we have two different drashot. My benayu, is there something which distinguishes the way they view it based on the way they're using the psukim? And the Gemara says yes. Ika benayu, there's a bit more discussion, but then the Gemara, the conclusion of the Gemara is that Ika benayu isha. There's a machloket between Rav and Rabbi Yochanan based on their source for why a non-Jew cannot act as a mohel, as to whether a woman, a Jewish woman obviously, can act as the mohelet, right? So, and it's counterintuitive. At least it was counterintuitive. Every time I read the Gemara, I still feel the counterintuitiveness, but you'll tell me whether you feel it as well. But this is the way it says. I would have said just the opposite, but the Gemara says it this way. L'man da'amar va'ata et briti tishmor leka. So if according to the one who focuses on the word brit, my covenant, so then a woman can't do it. Di'isha lav bat milahi. Because a woman is not part of that covenant. She didn't have a Brit Milah. Uleman da'amar himo yimo ika. But if I'm focusing on the pasuk of that, that a person who has a Brit Milah should do the Brit Milah, and can do the Brit Milah, so then a woman can do it. Di'isha kiman de mahale damya. Because a woman is as though she has the circumcision. In other words, it's just that, she's as full a Jew as any other male, but she has a Brit Milah by birth. Right? She doesn't have an Orla, so she's Behula. So therefore, there's nothing stopping her from doing the Brit. Now, basically what it's saying is the following. If I would have, as I said, as I said, instinctively I would have said the opposite in terms of the psukim, but it's the same idea. In other words, a woman needs to be a person, the first pasuk is saying the person who's doing the Brit Milah needs to have been introduced into the Brit. And a woman wasn't introduced into the Brit because she didn't have a Brit Milah. Whereas the second pasuk is saying, does he have an orla? Is he mahul? And the answer is, he doesn't have an orla. He's mahul. So what about a woman? She doesn't have an orla either. She's behula. Right? But it's the basic idea is, does someone have to be initiated into the club, as it were, right? The Brit Milah club. So then a woman wasn't initiated. But if it's a question of, is this person a full standing member of Klal Yisrael? Then the answer is, of course, yes, she is.
So does this answer, if Moshe was born with already a...
Okay, let's hold off with Moshe, because the Gemara is going to ask the question. Let's see what the Gemara says. So the Gemara says, Umi ika lamad amar ishalo. How can you possibly say that a woman can't be a mohelet? V'haktiv v'tikach tzipora tzor. Right? There you have it. Tzipora. Right? And we'll assume for the moment, okay, get into the problem. She's not Jewish, but she's kind of Jewish. Right? How it is, whatever. She's before Sinai, how she had a gay root of some kind, whatever. But she does it, it worked. Right? It's clear that Brit Milah can be done. And the Gemara doesn't respond, no, that's before Matan Torah, we don't learn from it, etc. No. So the Gemara says, V'haktiv, V'tichrot, and she cut off. She cut off the Ola. So, Kribe said, no. You can read, because the Vav isn't in the text, right? Because as we know, most in biblical Hebrew, quite frequently, the word is not written out fully. It can be read vatichrat, not tichrot, that she cut it off, but rather vatichrat, that she made sure that it was cut. Da'abra le'inish achrina ba'avad. She told a man to do it. V'i bayit emar, or Atya ihi va'atchala, she started the cutting. Va'ata Moshe va'agmara, and Moshe finished it. In other words, why doesn't Moshe start it? Right? We're not talking about Moshe's Brit. We're talking about one of the children. So, as I stress, one of the children. There's a machloket as to was it the Eliezer, the second child, or whether for some reason Gershom the first child did not have a Brit Milah. And now he has to have that Brit Milah. But Moshe is incapacitated in some kind of way. Tzipora initiates. Moshe snaps out of it, right, and finishes the job. Okay. Now, what's going on here? Right? Why is they so poor Tzipora? Why can't she just do her Brit Milah and be done with it? Right? Because the principle here is the issue. In other words, if you believe that here the question is that a person who's going to do the Brit Milah has to be someone who was initiated into the Brit. So then we have to find a reason why Tzipora's Brit doesn't count. Okay? It counts, but that Tzipora didn't really do it. Right? That she was the one who made sure it happened. She was the one who started it, and Moshe finished it, and now you can get into all sorts of halachic discussions, which I'm not going to get into. Is this similar to other acts halachically, which you come up in the Gemara of, let's say, someone's bringing a korban, and he starts the shchita, but he stops in the middle and someone else finishes it. Is that okay? What happens if you do again, just keeping the knife and blood coming in. So you do a shchita, I start the shchita, and someone else finishes it, right? At what point? All sorts of questions that come up. We can ask the same kind of question with regard to a Brit Milah, right? None of us want to have our children being the objects of the halacha questions of this type. Okay, no. What's the point? The point is that we have the principle, and when you have if you will, the halachic lab is to create a situation which doesn't exist in the rest of the world, but that allows me to look at what is going on and to understand the principles that are at play. Right, the same way that in a physics lab, right? If I take a look at the light in this room, so I know, well, I don't know, and I don't even think about it. Are those light waves or are those particles? Right? In the real world, it makes no difference. Right? In the lab, I'll create the conditions that will allow me to know that it's both, and then I'll be able to apply that new principle in all sorts of areas, which will allow me to move technology forward as a result. But so the same thing in terms of legal principles. In 99% of the cases, it really doesn't matter. I create the lab conditions, and then based on that I have the principle. Here it's working in the reverse because I start with tzipora, but it doesn't matter because and I have a lot of things. Just hold off on the questions because I'm supposed to finish in 14 minutes. So now okay, so I have a machloket. I have a machloket between Rav and Rabbi Yochanan. According to Rav, a woman should not be a mohelet, and according to Rabbi Yochanan, there's no reason why a woman cannot be a mohelet. And so I see three different approaches that come up in the Rishonim to understand it. Number 10, approach number 1, in the Uraim representing the majority of Ashkenazic poskim. So Rav Eliezer Mimetz, right, a very important halachic figure in the 12th century. So he says the following, he records, but he's not alone in this. Oved kochavim asur l'mahel. So a woman, a non-Jew, cannot act as a mohel. And for some reason, I thought I had put in bold print here, so I apologize for not being there. So then he brings the Gemara, and he says the last line, there's a basic principle in halacha. Rav v'Rabbi Yochanan, the middle of the last line. Rav v'Rabbi Yochanan, halacha k'Rabbi Yochanan. When we have a machloka between Rav and Rabbi Yochanan, so then the halacha will generally follow Rabbi Yochanan. Hilkach shaper dami itatalam imhal. Bottom line, there's no reason why a woman can't be a mohelet. Period. Cannot. In other words, a woman can be a mohelet, and there's no reason at all why a woman cannot do it. That's it. Okay? Simple. Right? What?
Say yes, lots of however.
Okay, 1 second. That's important one. Then we will opinion number 2, which is the majority of poskei Sfarad. I just bring you the Rambam here, and the Rambam says Hakol ksherin lamul va'afilu arel ve'eved ve'isha ve'katan malin b'makom she'en sham ish. So everyone can do it. There's no reason, even a katan, by the way. Right? There isn't, because what's the mitzvah? The mitzvah is to remove the orla. Mm-hmm. So as long as you have a person or doing it and removing the mitzvah, the orla, so it could be anyone who is involved in the, if you will, involved in the brit. So even if that person, when we talk about an arel, a person doesn't have a brit milah himself, so it could be who's a Jew. So let's say a person for whatever medical condition, he's a hemophiliac, so therefore he never had a brit milah, etc. In other words, this is but he can act as a moel, and a woman can act as a moel. Everyone can act as moelim, but as long as they're Jewish. Avalakum lo yimo klal, and there's an interesting halacha, which we're not getting into the question of the non-Jew here. But is that imal eno tzarich lachzor v'lamul shniya? In other words, if let's say a non-Jewish surgeon removed the orla, so then we don't have to do a second brit. We don't have to do according to the Rambam. You don't have to do because again the question is, does this child have the orla or does not have the orla? Has to have been done after 8 days, but that's a different discussion. So so here. But I want to stress, though, that the Rambam had said that everyone's kosher b'makom she'ein sham ish, in a place where there is no man. Why does the Rambam say that? In other words, why is it ideally done by a man? Okay, so what? It comes
from the man to give it to the boy.
I understand, but once according to Rabbi Yochanan, it's himo yimol. Anyone who is part of the covenant can do it. So why can't, anyone's a Jew. So why can't why does it only where there is no man? So that we could understand based on what other Rishonim say, namely that we'll just say that, because I want to get into some of the other sources without reading it inside, is that there's a machloket. In other words, it's true. Halacha k'Rabbi Yochanan. And yes, a woman can do it, and an Eved can do it. Yes, that's all true. But there's Rav who's saying that it doesn't work. So why, if you don't have to have that problem, why have the problem? In other words, why get into the question? The machloket amoraim. I'll just give you a good story. It's a good story. It happened to me, so it actually is a true story. So my eldest son my second son was born in between. We looked at the clock, or I didn't really look at the clock. It was a shkia question. Was born, the day that he was it Vav Shvat or was it Zayin Shvat? His birthday's coming up, and so I wasn't 100% sure, and I figured it out. I worked it out that it was actually in between the time when astronomically it was here in Yerushalayim. Astronomically, it was not. It was after the shkia. But if what's known as Shkia HaNireh, because we're at an elevation of 800 meters, and so you can see beneath the horizon, if you're looking in clearly, so it was not yet Shkia. Right? So I asked Rav Lichtenstein Zatzal as to whether we should do the Brit Milah the day before, the 8 days from Vav, or 8 days from Zayin. So he said, okay, you should do it on Zayin. So I started making a whole pilpulim with him. It was 1 second with the Shkia and the Zman, and He cuts me off and he says, I don't know. If it was my son, I wouldn't want him to be a Suffolk Orel. Okay? End of discussion. Okay? It's okay. You're playing with your halachic, your thumbs moving in all different directions. Bottom line is, if you're wrong, right, before day 8, the child's brit doesn't count. If you're right, and really it should have been done ideally on Yud Gimel, and it was instead done on Yud Daled, a day late. It wasn't Bismana. Okay, Nishkafelach, right? So go with the Nishkafelach. That is that's what the Rambam might be saying here, right? He's saying, okay. It's true. If a woman's available, there's no man available. So the woman should do it, of course. But if you can avoid the question, why why deal with it, right? So, do the nishkafelach. And that's that could very well be what the Rambam is saying here. So and with regard, there is a shita, which, again, I'm not going to read it inside because I want to read some other things inside for the end of this year. But that says no, this is an exception. Normally speaking, halacha Rabbi Yochanan. In this particular case, because of the way that the Gemara continues and develops in terms of that sugya, you can perhaps intimate that the halacha is like Rav, and that a woman cannot be a mohelet. So a woman should not be a mohelet. That's the third opinion. In other words, again, one opinion is, of course. Another opinion is, it's asur. Middle ground is, yes, she can. Better not. Okay, that's ideally not. All right, and that's the minhag. There is a bit of and this is actually continues to go down. The question is, if you will, the halacha lemasa application of this is how much does a person have to, or a community have to worry about getting a mohel? In other words, if let's say you're in a small village in Poland, right, and in Lithuania, wherever it is, in shtetl, and there isn't a mohel there, but there is a mohelet, there's someone, a woman who can do it. Do you have to go to the trouble of bringing a mohel from a different town to do the Brit Milah, or can you just do it locally?
I think it was somewhere in Eastern Europe where they even flew in the mohel.
Right, so today people fly mohelim. I have those of you know Dr. Ari Greenspan. So he gets a log every few months. He'll go do globe trotting all around, to do different Brit Milot, and as well as some shchita along the way as well, for different communities, and hopefully he doesn't get his knives confused. So that is okay, fine, you can do it. But how much do you have to? So basically, this is, as you're familiar with, the bottom line halacha, which is accepted just about by everyone, is that that lechatchila, women do not do Brit Milah, but if a woman does a Brit Milah, or if there isn't it's not even a question if she did it, but rather if there are circumstances where it is difficult for a man to be obtained to do the Brit Milah, then a woman can do the Brit Milah. Let's say, for example, this is one of the issues. Let's say you can get a Moel, but only after the 8th day. And you have a woman who can do it on the 8th day. Right? So then it's better to have a woman do it on the 8th day. Right? But that's very rare that you're going to have that circumstance, but that is the bottom line halacha. What about the other ancillary roles that a woman has? Let's say a woman being a sandak. So here, if you take a look at source number, this is just the way that it's sort of kind of mind-blowing. Source number 16. Okay? 16, because we are now in the 13th century. And this is the Maharami Rutenberg, the great posek of Germany in the 13th century, the Rebbe of the Rosh and the Rebbe of many others who really make their imprint on the halacha. And he says the following, Eino nira klal minhag kasher. So in my opinion, this is not at all a proper minhag, shenoagin berov hamikomot, which is, this minhag is the primary minhag, and I'm going to stamp it out. That's basically what the Maharam is about to say, and he succeeds. But what is the primary minhag at the time? Shahi isha yoshevet bebeit hakneset im hanashim. That you have a woman sitting in the Bet Knesset with all of the men. Umalira tinok becheka. And she's the Sadakit. In other words, the dominant minhag in the 13th century in Germany, and perhaps in other Ashkenazic lands as well, was that the woman would act as the Sandakit, most likely the mother. Right? And if you think about it, it's a very nice family simcha. Right? You have the father with the baby, and you have the mother holding the baby, and the moel. Right? And of course, if the father is the moel himself, the mother holding the baby, telling the father what to do with the Brit Milah. Right? Okay? So that's it's a wonderful thing. Right? 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 So even if the husband is the moel, o avia, o bina, or it's her father who's the moel, or her son who's the moel, the lav orcha likanes, why not? Because lav orcha likanes isha mekushetet ben ha'anashim ubifnei hashchina. It's not sanua for a woman, because a woman's, after all, she's going to come in dressed up for her for the bris, right? And there she is in the middle of the shul. Mi sheyesh biyado limchot yimacheh. So whoever can, who can ever object and stop this should. V'hamachmir tavo alav bracha v'shalom. Right? Now that becomes, as we all know, that becomes a standard practice. The Ramah, when he brings this din, he says, "Ein li isha liot sandak letinok b'makom she'efshar be'ish mishum davei kipritzut." Right. So within I skipped number 17, which is an interim step. There it seems as though the minhag is still alive. A few, like 100 years or so after the Maharam, the minhag is still alive, but it's no longer the dominant minhag. And by the time of the Ramah, right, so it's been stopped. But it's clear, and we can again think of it, like, whether it was the mother herself, whether it was one of the grandmothers who's acting as the sandakit, etc. That was the minhag, right? You don't find any mention of this among Sephardi poskim, right? But this is within the context of Ashkenazic poskim, and this is the seems to be it was the dominant minhag by their own testimony, and it becomes it becomes because of the concern of tzniut, so it stops. Now, today, I could make a very good argument, by the way, when, this is assuming there are no women in the shul, right? The men don't see the women. And so now you bring a woman who is not only a woman, but is dressed up for a simcha, and some of the poskim talk about her makeup and her perfume, etc. And she's there in the middle of the shul, right? So that is something which is provocative. Or at least the Maharam felt it was provocative at the time. Today, when you walk into the shul of the Brit, right, and there are an equal number of men and women in the shul, and everyone's schmoozing with one another, to say that because of tzniut, because the mother is going to be holding it, right, it's, it doesn't, the argument I don't think no longer holds, right? And there are those women who have reverted to that original minhag. Right, with the women acting as sandakit, and even the Ramah who says that it shouldn't be done, he says mishum davei kepritzut. But this is where wherever something, a door is closed, a window is open. So where's the window that's open? So this is where the minhag of kfatarim start. Umikol makom hi ozeret leba'ala u'mevia tinok ad beit hakneset. Right, the mother is the one who hands the baby off, and that the Maharam himself mentions this as, if you will, the consolation prize to the mother, that she should hand the baby to the mohel. That's the way that the Maharam says it. She should hand the baby to the mohel, and the mohel should bring it to the kisei shel Eliyahu, and it should happen. So we, have added a couple of different layers, a couple more skula for those people who are waiting for their first child, and they become the kfatarim, etc. But this is where it begins. Getting back to what I mentioned at the beginning of this year. So what about making the bracha and drinking the wine? What's happened? So basically, the Maharam took the mother out of the shul. Right? She had been, maybe she was the sandakit herself. Maybe she was sitting next to her mother who was the sandakit. Right? So she's sitting right there. So of course, they make the bracha. Who should drink the wine? The mom. Right? It's a skula for her. It's a skula for the baby. That's where the idea of giving the baby a little bit of the wine comes in, etc. All of that is fine. I don't have time to read it inside. I apologize, but that's where it comes in. You take the mother out of the shul, so how could she drink the wine? She's just not there anymore. Right? And so then the Shulchan Aruch just says, there's a whole, when he comes to it, V'noagin k'shemagiyim l'b'damayichay, number 21, noten me'orayim be'etzba'o u'fi atinok, right? And then the Ramah says, what about the rest of the koshel bracha? The baby got some. And then there are all sorts of questions. Well, maybe the Moel himself should drink it. Maybe the Sandak should drink it. Maybe kids at the Simcha should drink it. All sorts of things that go on, right? But it's because what's happened is that there was a minhag. We knew who was going to drink it, the woman, but now we don't have her in the shul anymore. So now we have to try to find someone else. And ultimately, this is now the minhag, the Aruch HaShulchan. After he brings all of these different minhagim, he says, this is number 23, Vetzleinu ha'mevarech shoteh. Right, so who drinks the wine today? Whoever makes the bracha of Asher Kideshi B'Betem. But that's much later. Really what happened originally was that it was going back to the time of the Gaonim, was that the woman would drink the bracha, but the woman was kicked out of shul. Right? She's no longer there at the time of the bris. She's just handed the baby over. So now we have to find someone else to drink. It takes a few hundred years, but the minhag has become that the person who makes the bracha, so he's the one who drinks it along with the baby.